I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase.
Outdoor adventure won't wait for engine problems. Things like hard starts, rough performance, and lost fuel economy are often caused by fuel gum and varnish buildup. Seafoam can help your engine run better and last longer. You simply pour a can into your gas tank. Hunters and anglers rely on Seafoam to keep their engines running the way it should the entire season. So pick up a can of Seafoam today at your local auto parts store or visit seafoamworks.com to learn more.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your home for deer hunting news, stories, and strategies. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and this is episode number 96. Today in the show, we're joined by Tony Peterson, who's sharing his in-depth tactics for hunting public land whitetails. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by Sitka Gear. And today we're talking public land whitetails. And joining us is one of the foremost experts on this topic, Tony Peterson. Now, Tony is an experienced outdoor writer and a dead serious deer hunter. So with that in mind, in just a few minutes, we're going to get Tony on the line. We're going to get to know him a little bit better, and then we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of how he's been able to have such consistent success hunting mature bucks on public land across the country. But before that, Mr. Co-host, Dallas-Fort Worth, Dan Johnson, what news do you bring from Iowa?
Not too much. I just finished a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and I'm working on my first beer of the night. So
I saw your picture on Instagram. It looked like just a bread sandwich. I didn't see any peanut butter or jelly, and my first thought was like, is he just eating 2 slices of white bread? That's what it looked like.
Oh, no. Trust me. There's plenty of peanut butter and jelly in the middle of that.
Okay. Now
I like to keep it towards the center, because if you bite into it and then it all comes out the side, I'm not into that.
See, I disagree. I feel like that's the sign of a good PB&J. You need to have enough filler to have a little bit of squirtage, or whatever you want to call it.
Squirtage. What's the squirtage factor?
I think probably a good thing for us would be to avoid using the term squirtage factor ever again on this show.
But at the same time, I think that squirtage factor could accurately describe a quality broadhead.
Elaborate, maybe.
You know, like you just smoke a deer, and some squirtage factors are higher or lower of the broadhead, which makes the blood trail harder or easier to follow. The higher the squirtage factor, the easier the blood trail to follow.
Okay, I guess you're the gear guy, so I'll let you roll with that. Other than PB&J and your first beer, though, things going pretty well?
Yeah, pretty well.
It's good.
Only one of my kids is sick this week, and it's not really even a sickness. It's just like snotty nose, and he's teething again, which I think lasts for 18 years. Shit, I don't know.
Well, that's good. Only one out of the family. That's better than sometimes, right?
That's right.
I actually got sick this past week for the first time in probably this past year, at least, that I can remember. I've had a nasty cold, like Thursday through Sunday. I was kind of out of it.
Yeah.
So
you feel better today?
I do. Today I finally feel better. Really yesterday afternoon I started feeling like my normal self again, and today I've been able to get back to work and get into stuff. But it kind of cramped my weekend plans. I didn't get to get out and do any shed hunting here in Michigan like I was hoping to. Didn't do any of the things I wanted to get done, so that's a bummer. But weather's warming up here and getting a little bit nicer, so hopefully going to get outside, do a little bit of scouting. Want to start some new habitat projects here on my main Michigan property. I've been wanting to do some hinge cutting and improve some bedding areas, so got that on the to-do list. Another thing I got to do, my hay bale blind that I had out behind this property, I had it strapped to some trees to hold it in place, and we had a massive windstorm come through recently and blew that sucker way far away. So I need to go retrieve that with a friend because it's too big to carry just myself. I need a friend to come with me and help carry that back into position. So that I need to get done pretty soon. I've been pushing it off, and probably my procrastination is going to bite me in the butt. I bet you if I come back too late, it's going to be on the neighbors or something. So I got to do that soon. But that's all that's new with me and my whitetail chores.
I know that me and you talked earlier, or was it later last week, about food plots. And I think that this year I am going to be able to plant my first official food plot. And I think we discussed a little bit that I might try brassicas out. So I'm looking forward to it. It was an old garden, had there's fence posts and a gate in it. And here pretty soon I'm going to start clearing it out, cutting the trees above it to get more sunlight in, and pull all the fence posts out and start spraying weed killer in about 2 months.
Nice. Yeah, I think you're gonna enjoy that. I hunt all sorts of different. Excuse me, I cannot talk today. Different types of situations, but on this couple properties I have where I do have permission to plant food plots, it is a really fun thing to do. You get to kind of, I don't know, give back in a way. It's kind of neat to be able to put something in the ground that the deer can benefit from, and seeing deer feeding in a food plot that you planted and did yourself. It's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool thing. So
right. I'm excited. My buddy, I mean, he pretty much told me I have rule of the roost on his piece. If I want to cut down some trees and hinge cut, if I want to plant a food plot, he's like, just do what you want, man. So
that's sweet.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to seeing what happens.
Very exciting. Very exciting. So kind of the opposite of what we just talked about, right? We've just been talking about planting food plots. Well, our topic today is going to be talking about places where you usually can't plant food plots, which is public land hunting.
Yep.
And this is kind of particularly interesting for me because I am going to probably be doing some public land deer hunting this year. I don't think we've talked about this on the podcast yet, but have we talked about my new Western whitetail trip that I finally decided on?
I think you wrote about it, but I don't think you mentioned anything on the podcast.
Yeah, so I've been thinking, maybe I briefly mentioned that I was thinking about, well, heck, I don't know where, maybe it was on another podcast, but I've been thinking about trying to do a totally different kind of whitetail hunt than I've ever done before. For the past 5 to 10 years, I've done a lot of hunting in the Midwest, but I wanted to try something out of my comfort zone this year, and I thought that might be going to a Western state and trying to either find some public land to hunt or get permission on some random piece out there, learn it on the go, and try to get down a whitetail. And so I finally decided I'm going to do that, and I applied for a tag to hunt in Montana. So
nice.
I'm going to be chasing whitetails in Montana this year, something very different than anything I've ever done before. So I'm not sure yet.
You know what part of the state yet?
I have an area I think I will be hunting. Not 100% sure yet. You don't need to choose a unit or anything.
Okay.
But it's probably going to be down there in the southwest part of the state, since that's where I'm going to be living this summer for a month. So
nice.
I figure I'm going to maybe do a little scouting while I'm out there. So if I can find a place to hunt that's nearby where we're going to be, that'd be ideal. So we'll see. It's going to be a different kind of adventure. I'm planning on probably just camping out of my truck for a week, 10 days. And, I think my game plan right now is to try early season. Their season out there opens like September 3rd, I think. So that'd be a fun way to start whitetail hunting way before I usually would. And, I can get out there and just try to figure out what that evening food source pattern is, and probably do a lot of long distance scouting, and then, try to plan a drone strike, go in there and hit them. So I'm excited. It's going to be something something definitely new, but this public land topic I think is going to be a good one for me to hear, since I've done some public land hunting, but not a ton. I think Tony has done way more than either of us have probably, so I think he's going to have some really great insight to share about the whole process of picking a piece of public land to hunt and how to go about learning it, hunting it, adjusting the hunting pressure, and all sorts of stuff like that. So
Where's this guy from?
I honestly do not know where Tony lives, so we'll have to ask him that here in a couple minutes.
Perfect.
So I don't know. You want to cover anything else before we call Tony?
No. Other than, do you eat Girl Scout cookies?
Do I eat Girl Scout cookies? Am I American?
Well, I love how you answered my question with a question, because for those of you guys who don't know, it's Girl Scout cookie season. And so, just make sure you stock up on your Girl Scout cookies. I've been binge eating for the last couple weeks, so
okay.
Just a heads up.
What's your favorite Girl Scout cookie?
I don't even know the name of them. The ones that have the there's 3 of them I really like, actually. The lemon ones with that like lemon frosting, and I eat those with some coffee. And then you have your Thin Mints, obviously. And then you have the other ones that are covered in, it's like a peanut butter rich cracker with chocolate around it.
Okay. I think I know the one you're talking about.
Yeah.
You have left out what I think is by far and away the best Girl Scout, not even just the best Girl Scout cookie, just the best cookie in the world.
Okay. What's that?
The cookie formerly known as a Caramel Delight, now known as a Samoa. It's a gift from God. I'm talking about the kind of cookie that looks like a wreath. There's a circle cut out in the middle, and then there's caramel and coconut and chocolate.
Yep.
Kind of
the Boone and Crockett of cookies.
It really is.
Yeah. Okay.
It is. Oh my gosh, I am getting.
I'm getting emotional over there.
Yeah, I really am. I'm not even exaggerating. Like, this thing has got my fingers shaking, my mouth salivating, my stomach's grumbling. And
let's get Tony.
Let's get Tony on. Before we do give Tony a call, though, let's take a quick break for a word from our sponsors of this podcast, Sitka Gear. All right, so as we do on every episode, I'm joined by Dennis Zuck, a Sitka product category leader. And my question for Dennis today is about this strong relationship that I know that Sitka has with Gore, the makers of Gore-Tex and those types of fabrics. And I'm curious, Dennis, how does that manifest itself in the products you guys create?
Yeah, well, I think, the Loon line is a very good example of that. So when we look at that statement, we make that, we want to do this with our product and make it better than anything else. We're able to take that same statement and cross it over to the Gore guys who are really material experts. So like the Fanatic, the Stratus, making a quiet system was absolutely important to us. And there's lots of things that go into those materials that people don't know. There's EPTFE films, which is, the thing that makes things breathe. And, there's adhesives that make it all lock together. And, they all make different noises, and they all work differently in systems. So we're able to bring that hunter perspective. We're able to bring that ask to them and work, across that to create really great products. So it's really a capability that's made us, it's enabled us to be a company that can provide that next level solution.
So there you have it. If you'd like to learn more about Sitka Gear, you can visit sitkagear.com. And now let's get Tony on the line. All right, with us now on the line is Tony Peterson. Welcome to the show, Tony.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, we're excited to chat. Me and Dan actually were just talking about Girl Scout cookies. So you've got a lot to follow on, but we think that this will be a good transition on to good stuff. So before you joined us, other than Girl Scout cookies, I did kind of give a brief introduction to who you were. I mentioned that you're an outdoor writer, a serious public land hunter, but I know there's a lot more to you. Could you give us just a little bit more detail on exactly what you're doing these days in the whitetail world?
Yeah, my primary gig is with Bowhunter Magazine as the equipment editor there. So I get to try out a lot of different equipment and test out bows and arrows and all kinds of stuff. But with the whitetail thing, just having grown up in Minnesota in the Midwest, I've just naturally gravitated toward whitetails. I love hunting everything else too, Western critters especially, but whitetails are they just get into your, under your skin, and it's just something that I've focused on so much, and it's just become a part of my writing career to focus on whitetails.
And I can certainly, Dan and I both can certainly relate to how they get under your skin. That's for sure.
Oh yeah.
Now you're writing for Bowhunter magazine. You're writing about whitetails a lot. How is that?
Yep.
How is that as a job? Is it a pretty good gig? Do you get to do as much hunting as most people think outdoor writers get to do?
It's the best job I've ever had, believe me. But there's 4 or 5 months a year where you're locked onto the computer and not really hunting very much. And because, and I'm not complaining about this in any way, I love my job, but because I have to hunt, I have to have dead critters, to write about and the experiences of hunting them. Some of the other things I kind of took for granted before, like fishing, they take a little bit of a backseat because there's only so much time that you can have away from home. So yeah, I do hunt a lot. I try to hunt, at least 5 or 6 states a year and have at least half of them be all public land. So I'm gone a fair amount, but I also have 4-year-old twins at home, so I can't be gone too much. So it's a little bit of a tightrope back there. But if you ever meet a real outdoor writer that complains about his job a lot, he should probably just go away, because it's a pretty sweet gig.
Those are
I don't
fighting
have
words.
a ton to really complain about, believe me.
Yeah, I can definitely relate. It's to your point though. They're definitely. It's not always sitting in the tree stand and watching giant bucks come in. There's a lot of work. There's a lot of computer time, but you can't complain. You're right. It's it's a pretty cool thing.
And you just gotta you just gotta make sure you can still have fun doing it somehow, because it does become a job, and so you gotta challenge yourself or figure out new things. And one of the things I've realized about my hunting career, my writing career, is I'm also really big into bird dogs. I love duck hunting and upland bird hunting. And so that's kind of my release now is, sometimes you take the deer hunting thing so seriously. And then for me, just to go out for a couple hours in the middle of the day and chase rough grouse with my lab, it's like, you just breathe a huge sigh of relief because there isn't that pressure there. But once again, I'm not complaining about getting to deer hunt for my job.
Yeah, I know what you mean about having those other hobbies where you can release some of that tension and not be so stressed, because I definitely felt that same thing. When I started doing this full time, or even before it was full time, I definitely felt that pressure, like you have to produce. And I think it's kind of a bummer how it can, if you let it, it can definitely make it less enjoyable than it really should be. So I've definitely tried to make a conscious effort not to get too worked up about it, because in the end, and maybe I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but for me at least, it's always been, in the end, yes, you want to get a kill, you want to show that success, but really it's how you can share your experiences, whether you had success or not. How can you share your experiences and what you learned from it, and why you did or maybe did not have success? At least that's what I've tried to tell myself that, so I don't gouge my eyeballs out every time I spook a buck or something like that. So
yeah, well, you can't. We're in a weird place with deer right now, and I don't think this is even any more evident than shed hunting right now. It's so, people are taking it so seriously, and it's getting so crazy. And I have to just remind myself, we're hunting rabbits with antlers here. It's not like we're curing cancer or something. It's fun. It's a passion. It's a lot of things to a lot of people, but when you take it so seriously that it starts really affecting your life in a negative way, that's bad. It's time to back up and look at the big picture a little bit.
Yeah.
And maybe not take ourselves so seriously. And like you said, for me, sometimes everybody wants the story about how you went out and figured out how to kill this big buck and you did it, but a lot of the best stories come out when you screw up and when things don't go according to plan. That's way more relatable to people and far more common than going out and killing booners every time you set your mind to it.
Yeah, I'm very thankful that people enjoy those types of stories. Otherwise, I wouldn't make a living. So,
no, I hear you. I mean, if the only thing you could write about was a fresh kill every time, none of us would have a job.
Yeah,
you just couldn't do it.
Doesn't happen as often as we would like, but
Nope.
but it sure is a lot of fun trying, that's for sure. So
Oh, yeah.
you mentioned a couple minutes ago that you try to have about half of your trips every year or half of your hunts be public land hunts. Why do you hunt public land so much?
Two reasons. Well, probably several reasons, but for me, being in the industry and being an outdoor writer that focuses largely on bow hunting whitetails, I was sitting in my office about 6 years ago, and I kind of had this revelation. I'm like, I've got to set myself apart from the crowd. I needed more work. I just wanted to do something different. And what I realized is there just weren't very many people out there in my position that were really getting after public land. I mean, most of the trend is to go the other way and try to hunt these highly managed properties, which, there's nothing wrong with that. But I felt like if people are going to pay me to do seminars and write articles and disseminate information from sort of an expert perspective, I was like, I really need to challenge myself. And anybody that's done it knows there's no better way to really challenge yourself as a bow hunter than to target good bucks on public land. And so I just said, that's what I'm going to do. And I've come to just truly enjoy that challenge because it encompasses every part of bow hunting, from the scouting, which is something I just absolutely love, to the actual hanging stands and getting it wrong and getting it right. And those other kind of hunts, if I get invited on a guided hunt, and sometimes I do those hunts, but you show up and so much of the work has already been done and so much of that process is taken away. And some people are okay with that and some aren't. And I just kind of like having everything. I like it from, deciding, okay, this is the state I'm going to try this year, to butchering the animal myself and everything that's in between.
Yeah, it's that process. That's really the hunt, at least in my opinion. I 100% agree with you. It's that process of everything from the beginning to that final act of, butchering and eating an animal. I want to be engaged in that entire process.
Yep.
I think that's where the real fun is. I'd much rather do all the work versus, being put in a tree and shooting something by happenstance. At least for me, I understand like you said, that's totally fine that other people like doing that. It just wouldn't be my preferred way to go about it. But
how important is it for someone in your position who is a writer and you write about hunting whitetails, tips and tricks, and how others can become a better or a more successful hunter? How important is it for you to, or for not you, but for others in the industry to realize who their actual audience is, and the audience to realize what the quote unquote hunting celebrity is actually hunting?
Well, so that's kind of a multifaceted question. And the reality of what's going on with the hunting industry is we've blurred the lines between entertainer and expert. And so if you flip on the Outdoor Channel or something, some of those shows are purely for entertainment. And if that's what it is, that's just fine. You turn it on, you want to see big critters get shot. That's okay. It's where some of this stuff starts to come from the perspective where people that are doing some of those hunts say they're experts, or they're really getting after it, and you can kind of see through that, and that's where it's tough. And I'm not knocking anybody specifically, but that perception out there, I feel like the hunting demographic, the people out there that are just, your weekend warriors or your average hunters out there, I feel like they're kind of getting turned off from the hunting industry as a whole because it's being presented that way, where maybe it's just entertainment, but a lot of those people producing that are trying to come off as experts too. And a lot of that just doesn't jive. If you're hunting a premier place in southern Iowa that's, 4,000 acres of super managed land, and that's what you do, that's okay. But you probably maybe don't have very much to offer the public land hunter in Pennsylvania, for example, who's living in a completely different world. So it's kind of a tough deal to manage the expectations from the audience as far as, is this entertainment? Is this education? Is it a little of both? And some of the shows out there, some of the writers out there do a really good job of both. And that really kind of is your job, but not everybody does a good job with it, So there's a really long-winded, convoluted answer to your question.
I'll allow it.
Thank you.
Thank goodness, because if those types of answers weren't allowed, then both me and Dan couldn't answer any questions either.
Yeah.
But I think, to your point, Tony, the other side of what you mentioned is that type of show, and again, not knocking it all. There's a place for it, like you said, entertainment. I enjoy them too, but I think the other, and we've talked about this a lot, the other kind of risk of that type of entertainment is that it can sometimes skew our expectations or other people's expectations about what hunting should look like. They would think that, well, because so-and-so killed a 160-inch 6-year-old every time I've ever pulled up their TV show, how come I can't? How come I don't see that deer all the time? Or I'm doing all this stuff, how come it's not working out for me? And I think it leads to a lot of frustration for people. And so it's something, we always try to talk about is trying to set realistic expectations based on, where you're at and what some, real goals could be versus, setting your sights on trying to be the next so-and-so on the outdoor channel. I think that's an easy way to get disenchanted and disappointed with hunting, which is obviously not what we want to do.
Well, absolutely. I think you're spot on there. And I really think one of the reasons that we shed hunter numbers is I run into a lot of, let's say, kind of 18 to 25-year-old crowd that comes in and they're setting their sights on, 140-inch plus bucks every year, and they're not able to do it because that's so difficult, and they become frustrated with the process. And in some ways, we're kind of skipping that natural progression of the hunter where everybody used to start out, hunting squirrels with a 22 and maybe moving up to rabbits and maybe pheasants and turkeys and then deer, and you were happy with whatever deer you shot first. And a lot of people are starting out with expectations that are just, to me, kind of insane. And I think, and I'm part of that problem too. I mean, I work for these magazines and these TV shows where we present this false reality out there, where if you look at, what the average person kills with a bow per year, I mean, it's like, anybody that's out there killing 115-inch bucks every year, I don't care if you're in Iowa or Michigan or Pennsylvania or South Carolina or wherever, if you're killing a buck like that, you're doing something better than most people out there. And you bump it right up and you go, okay, how about 130 inches, which is a great deer. If anybody's out there consistently killing those deer, even in the good states, they're really doing something right. And like you said, most people with their goals, I tell people all the time, just hunt for what makes you happy. Nobody else cares what you kill. There's like 3 people in your life that actually care what size of a buck you kill. The rest of them really don't. So if that deer walks in and you'd be stoked to shoot it, just shoot it. Who cares what everybody else thinks?
Yeah, I agree. It's something we try to emphasize a lot when we talk about this topic too, because I think, to your point, it's easy for, when we present what we're doing or on a TV show or in a magazine article or me and Dan here talking about, our goals, those are our personal goals, but they do not in any way need to dictate what you, the listener, is doing. Just because Dan hunts in Southern Iowa and he waits for 4-year-olds, or because I'm, on a trip to Ohio or here in Michigan and I'm, shooting such and such, do it like you said, Tony. I love that. Do what gets you stoked, what makes you happy, and all the other things will fall into place. I've always thought of hunting, it should be like a ladder. You should take steps up that ladder, one step at a time, and don't let the media or social media or anything like that dictate, where you set your sights, because that's just setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah, big time. And the people that are really passionate about it, they like you said, they move up the ladder. So they go, all right, this kind of age class of buck really isn't challenging for me, so I'm going to bump it up and go for that 3.5 or 4.5 year old or whatever. But some people don't have the time. Some people don't have the spots. Some people just don't have the drive to go out all the time. If that's the case, that's fine. Just admit it and go for what's going to make you happy. There's no reason to get all bent out of shape over going after deer that you just can't or won't kill. That's crazy.
Yeah. So true. So let's take a step back to public land now. And I think a lot of these things we've just mentioned about setting realistic goals and everything can definitely be something you need to think about when it comes to hunting public land. But you just shared with us why you hunt public land. Let's talk about now, for someone who is hunting public land, whether it be by choice or by necessity. Can you kind of, I really want to dive deep into your entire process of how you go about hunting public properties, everything from finding a spot to learning about a spot to actually being in there hunting. So I guess, can we start at a high level? How do you go about actually choosing a property or finding a public piece to hunt? How does that process start for you?
So for me, it depends. If I'm looking for, I live just north of the Twin Cities, so if I'm looking for a place around here to hunt, my process will be a little bit different than, let's just say last night, for example, I couldn't sleep because I kept thinking about some of these walk-in areas in South Dakota I started hunting last year. And so, I snuck out of the bedroom and started looking on my iPad at aerial photos at midnight last night, looking up just some of the public land there. And for me, the biggest part of the process, especially if I'm looking for an out-of-state hunt, which I do a lot, is just that time on the aerial photos. I know some people like to go on the internet forums and stuff and, hey, any good places in southwestern Oklahoma or something like that. But, that information is just not vetted. And I'm not saying you can't get good information that way. But for me, I pick a state I want to hunt, and let's just use like Nebraska as an example. I love Nebraska. I'll say I want to go to Nebraska and hunt the rut. The first thing I'm going to do is figure out where the big cities are in Nebraska. Now, there really aren't very many. There's only a couple, and they're on the east side of the state. So I'm going to look for a place in the state that has no people. I want to get away from people because hunting pressure, anybody that hunts public land knows hunting pressure is just like your number one enemy, no matter what. To me, it trumps everything. It trumps weather. It trumps season timing, anything. And so I just want to start looking in an area where there just probably won't be very many people. And then once I started identifying some public land places there, then I get on the aerial photos and really dig in and look and see whether those specific parcels have something that offers a whitetail hunter. It's kind of how I start.
So elaborate on that last piece for us. What are you looking for when you're on the aerial? What does quality public land, terrain, or property look like for you from an aerial view?
First off, the first thing I'm going to look at is access. If it's got a whole bunch of, walking trails or logging roads, or if it looks like it's really easy to access, I'll skip it. But if I find a place that, maybe has one access point or two access points, then I'll start digging in. And then I'm looking for, with whitetails, one of the first things I always look for, a lot of people go and look for food sources. They'll look for those ag fields or, some kind of food source on there. But for me, I look for water. My absolute favorite type of whitetail spot to hunt is something with moving water in it. I just love creeks, streams, rivers, something like that. I know if I find moving water, I'll find probably pretty decent whitetail cover. I'll be able to find a crossing somehow, whether I can actually see the low spots on the river in the aerial photos. I mean, this aerial photography, the satellite photography now, you can actually zoom in and see rocks sticking out of the water and tell which way the river's flowing, tell how shallow it is. It's just amazing. But for me, that's what I start with. I want some kind of moving water to start with.
And so you're looking at that moving water as something that's going to be a tool sort of for you, so that you'll be able to know some things right out the gate because of the fact that that deer will relate to that moving water in some certain way, or like you mentioned, cross it, and I imagine maybe you use that type of thing for access in and out of a property too, maybe?
Oh, absolutely. Access is huge, covers your noise. You're usually below the banks, provided it's not too big of a river. You can wade most of them. But there are a couple other things. If I have to cross a river to hunt the other side for some reason, I can leave 90% of my competition behind because they won't do it. It's the same thing like climbing a great big hill or a bluff. I'll look for that too. But with the rivers, especially if you get on bigger chunks of federal land, there'll be a lot of public grazing on there, cattle grazing. And so there's only going to be so many places with decent cover that whitetails like. Now, this would be different if I were looking for mule deer, antelope, or something, obviously. But for whitetails, you want the best, thickest cover you can find. Most of the time, that's right next to the rivers or the creeks. It might be only just patches of cottonwoods or something, but it'll be better than the surrounding area. And so you know there'll probably be whitetails there. There's usually agriculture pretty close to those river, the watersheds. There's usually the right stuff there. And on top of that, because rivers are low, you can use them for access, like you said, but there's also a lot of times a lot of really good pinch points and funnels along rivers because of the bends, and it's just a great starting point most of the time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But taking a step back, I guess I didn't kind of probe on this before you even get to the actual aerial photographs. I'm just kind of curious, actually trying to figure out where these public parcels are. Is there a resource that you found that's helpful for that? I mean, are you just going and looking at Google Earth and seeing where the marked, National Forest or National Wildlife Refuge is or whatever? Or is there a government website you've been able to find for different states that's helpful or anything like that?
Mostly the state game agencies now have really good interactive maps. And so what I'll do is I'll pull up Google Earth, and then I'll go to, Nebraska's Game and Fish or South Dakota Game Fish and Parks or whatever, and start looking for, decent sized chunks of public land in the area I want to hunt. And then I'll just look at my aerial photos on Google Earth or whatever and take a closer look at them and just kind of decide. But, this process used to be so much more difficult to figure out where you could hunt and what looked good and stuff. And now you can do so much of your scouting from home. It's just amazing. And so some of the state game agencies have taken a little while to catch up to this, but an awful lot of them have really, really good interactive maps on their websites. And that's just the easiest way for you to go out and see every piece of public land in that state. And then you can start your search.
Yeah. Okay, so let's say we've done that, right? We've said, okay, we're going to hunt Nebraska. We've decided that we like this general area here. Do you kind of pick one piece of public land you really like, or do you kind of hedge your bets and say, okay, I know I want to hunt this general area, but I haven't been there on the ground before, so here's one piece I like, and then do you try to find a couple backup plans just in case, or do you usually find a spot and you're sticking with it?
So, whitetails, it depends. A lot of times on my whitetail spots that I find, they'll be smaller. So it might only be an 80-acre chunk or a 320-acre chunk or maybe a section. And I always try to have a plan B, C, D, at least a couple, because you never know when you get there how many people are going to be there, or it might not look the way you expect it to. Now, if I'm hunting, a great big national grassland or something, that might be a different story, because I know I can probably get away from the crowds in there. But primarily for whitetails, if I'm going to travel to hunt them, I'm always going to have at least a couple of backup spots to check out, because you never know. I've showed up to these places and they've been just overrun with people. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does, you need another place to go. You know?
Yeah, that definitely seems that, that's the best way to go about it, because I haven't been in a situation like that. Well, I guess I have been in a situation like that in public land, but the same thing even on private when I've done out-of-state hunts and gotten permission on a private piece. Yep. Sometimes you arrive and all of a sudden, like I found out this past year, I got permission on a spot in Iowa, but I didn't realize that they'd given permission to just about every other hunter in the county too. So you have to be able to adjust and adapt to that type of scenario with a plan B, C, etc.
Yep. Well, and to that point, one of the things that I notice about public land is people get really soured on the experience. Especially you guys in Michigan or here in Minnesota, we have a lot of hunting pressure. Over in Wisconsin, a lot of hunting pressure, and hunters will get really, really cagey about going out on public land in other states. And man, if you've been out there to some of these states where there just aren't as many people and as many hunters, the public land hunting can be really, really good. And most people want to go out and find that private land because there's that stigma attached to public land. But if you do your homework, I've got spots in several different states that are better overall for just more deer activity and my chance to run into a truly mature buck than a lot of my private spots here in Minnesota.
That's a great point. And I know you probably don't want to give away any of your secrets here, but are there any states out there that you recommend as pretty decent options for public land hunters that maybe some people aren't considering, or guys that want to make a trip out somewhere, maybe that hunt on the East Coast or something that they're considering a trip out that might be worth trying to look into for public land?
There's a ton of them. I mean, Wisconsin, Missouri, Iowa's public land is phenomenal if you can stomach the tag. Kentucky, and if you get west of the Mississippi a little ways, there's kind of that flyover area. I love the Dakotas. I love Nebraska. Kansas has some unbelievable walk-in stuff. Last year, I spent 6 days in Oklahoma hunting public land, and we were covered in deer. There are a lot of really good options out there that aren't necessarily the premier states. I mean, most of the attention goes to Iowa, Illinois, and Kansas, and I don't ever want to dissuade anybody from hunting those, but there are some really good options out there with really inexpensive non-resident tags where you can go have a good hunt. I know people like to focus on traveling for whitetails as that trip to kill a giant, but if you go in some of these with realistic expectations, you'll have a blast. You'll have good deer hunting, provided you do your homework, and it's not going to cost you, more than, it depends where you come from, but you might get a really good hunt for $500, $600, $700, $800.
Yeah, I think so many people. I think this maybe is changing, but in the past, I think there maybe was an assumption for a lot of folks that if they wanted to have that, Midwest experience and chase some of these great big bucks, that they'd have to, pay $3,000 for an outfitter or have to have like a $5,000 lease or whatever. But to your point, there really are so many relatively affordable DIY options if you're willing to put in the work, if you're willing to save a little money for gas and food, and if you're okay with not staying somewhere fancy. I like to sleep in the back of my truck and eat a Mountain House meal and head out into the woods, and that's a great way to get a hunt in for on a budget.
Well, that's just about everything I do, and that's what I try to get across to people is because especially now when I with 2 little girls at home, I'm not going for 10 days at a time on these crazy hunts. I'm going for 4 or 5 days. And since I'm paying for it myself, I want a reasonable price over the counter tag. I'm going to go camp with a couple buddies, and the whole thing is going to cost me $600, and on top of that, you're going to have a really good chance of killing something. And these opportunities are out there. A lot of people get intimidated by the process, but once you do it one time, you just get that comfort level up, and it's not so intimidating any longer.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the fun is in the process too. Doing all
Absolutely.
this. It's different, and again, this can be applied. I think in a lot of ways, what we're talking about can be just as applicable to hunting in your backyard. I mean, if you in your general area, let's say, if you needed to find a new spot and you're going public, but if you are doing this out-of-state type hunt looking for public, it's a fun new experience that I think a lot of people would enjoy trying.
Yeah. Well, and on the note of hunting close to home, the benefit there is you can get your boots on the ground and look at every inch of the cover that you might want to hunt, and you're not going to. This is a different world when you're traveling to go have one of these little adventures. But if you're just looking for a place close to home, I mean, you have the benefit of if you want to walk enough miles, you can really look over the ground and decide what you're going to hunt, and what you're not. And that's a big deal, especially right now. We're sitting here right before spring green up in this perfect time where the woods just reveals all of last fall's secrets. And it's so nice to go out and wander around and figure out what you're going to do next year right now.
Yeah, so let's talk about that public land scouting. What does your scouting process look like?
If I'm close to home, it looks like I'm walking every inch I can, because that's what I try to do. And, I'm looking for the typical winter scouting stuff, of course, the old scrapes and rubs mostly. I really like rubs. But most of the time I'm halfway looking for hunter sign. If I go into a property and I see, the trees are trimmed up, or there's stands left there, or there's litter all over or something, and I just can't get away from the obvious sign of hunters, I'm probably going to write that off and look for somewhere else. When I travel out of state, I'm starting to do this more where I'll go on a turkey hunt somewhere and scout out new properties while I'm turkey hunting. In fact, on April 1, I'm heading out to South Dakota to turkey hunt some walk-in areas that I hunted last fall, and I just want to check out some more ground. And then a little later, I'm going down to Missouri, northern Missouri, to hunt public land for turkeys, and I'm going to scout that out for deer too. And that's a good way to get familiar with the area without having the pressure of killing a big buck. But if you can't do that, this one of the most important things about this process. If you're going to make a go at it and decide you're going to hunt public land, especially if you want to do one of these out-of-state trips with your buddies, if you have any way to build in a day or 2 or 3 to scout, just glass, just walk and figure out if your pre-hunt research was correct, that is so valuable compared to showing up and having to hunt from day one. And I think one of the reasons that I've had quite a bit of success public land hunting is because before I had kids, I used to just leave for like 4 days, 5 days ahead of the hunt and just tell my wife I'll be home when I'm going to be home. And I would scout nonstop for 4 days before I started hunting. And I got to glass all those river bottoms and walk them all and figure out if the deer were moving there or not. And that information, without having the pressure of carrying your bow, is just so valuable when you start hunting. You just solidify all of your beliefs. Or, if what you thought was going to be awesome turns out to be bunk, you've got time to move on to the next one and figure it out. And scouting that way is just ridiculously valuable. It's more valuable than hunting in a lot of situations.
And sorry, Dan, were you going to say something?
Well, I just had a question in regards to maybe different states and different terrain. Obviously there's places where your main method is going to be a tree stand, and then maybe your main method may be a ground blind or spot and stalk.
Sure.
Is there a differentiation between how you scout based on how you're going to hunt?
No. Well, I shouldn't say that. I kind of know going into it, if I'm going to be doing the tree stand thing or spot and stalk, or maybe I'm going to have to build a natural ground blind or something. So I guess I will say, yeah, I might watch different areas. If I think I'm going to go out and hunt prairie whitetails somewhere, I may pick a peak that I can see for 5 miles in every direction to watch. If I think I'm going to tree stand hunt a creek bottom or a river bottom, I may sit on the same point and glass it for 3 days in a row to watch and see exactly where they like to walk. So yeah, I guess you're right. I do look at it differently, but for me, even though I love to spot and stalk, I grew up as an ambush hunter. I grew up hunting smaller properties in the Midwest, and so even though I love to spot and stalk, I'm just not very good at it. I blow a lot of stalks when I go. I have fun, but I'm just not that good at it because it's not in my wheelhouse. So most of the time when I go out, my plan is to hang stands or use blinds and wait them out because that's just what I'm better at. So I guess it just depends on where I'm going.
So continuing on that through that process then a little bit. Let's say we've picked a property. You've maybe went there in the spring. You did a little bit of scouting when you went turkey hunting. Now it's the season. The season's opened. You mentioned that lots of times you like to get there a little bit before your actual hunt happens. So is that the case even if you're showing up for a rut hunt? So you arrive and you could hunt, but you just actively choose not to, and you just choose to scout for a couple days? Is that what you're saying? Or are you saying this is like an early season, you show up before the season opens?
Both. So if I show up and it's during the season, I'll hunt, but a lot of times I'll do kind of what I call an observation stand, where I may not move right in on where I think it's going to be just popping, and I'll watch and see. Obviously if I go on an early season hunt and I can show up before the season, that's the easiest way to do this. But I really like spending some time observing, and if I see something going on during the season, if I show up at a rut hunt in Nebraska, if I see these deer running through a certain patch of cedars or something, I'll move there as soon as I possibly can. So it's kind of do a little bit of both. But one thing I should say about this is so much of the whitetail hunting is focused around the rut, and we all love the rut. But I grew up in Minnesota. I live in Minnesota, and our gun season opens the first weekend of November every single year. So I never had the rut to count on. So it's not as big of a deal to me. And so I've always hunted September and October heavily because that's when our best chance is, because once it gets to November, we got 500,000 gun hunters out there. And so I do go hunt the rut every single year somewhere on public land, but I'm definitely not afraid to hunt early season stuff and hunt October on public land. I think I might be getting way off on a tangent here, but I really think that we give way too much credit to hot weather, to the lull, to wind as cutting down deer movement. And I go hunt these places, early season in North Dakota, you'll hunt, it'll be 90 degrees and the deer will be moving all over. Just go hunt them when you can. Go scout them when you can. Don't rely necessarily on the rut. Now, and I'll tell you something on that. Probably my least favorite time to go hunt public land is like November 7th through 12th, which is like my favorite time to hunt overall in some ways, because everybody is out. If you're out there on October 15th and it's kind of hot and windy, nobody's hunting. Everybody's waiting for the rut. But when you get out there on November 7th and it's 22 degrees in the morning and the conditions are perfect, it's like everybody and their brother is out there rattling and grunting and hanging stands, and it's just a different world out there. So the rules that apply to public land for maybe the best times for me to hunt, I don't necessarily believe those on public land.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So if you had to pick, let's say you didn't work the job you do, and you can only have 1 week of vacation to hunt one of these public land spots, maybe let's say for an out-of-state public land trip, what week would you pick during the hunting season?
The very first week I could possibly go. The earliest I could possibly go. In fact, I was talking to a buddy of mine that I'm going to South Dakota with next year. And South Dakota's opener is a little bit later. It's the end of September. But I hope it's 100 degrees when we go out there, because I'm going to sit on ponds, and I don't want anybody else out there. I love hunting crappy conditions. I love it when it's really hot, really windy, and people will stay home.
Makes a lot of sense, especially in that public land situation where one of your biggest factors is simply avoiding hunting pressure. So if you're out there when nobody else is, you're right there. You've checked off the first point on your list.
It's everything. And, people, they have a hard time believing that, because we've been so ingrained to believe that windy conditions shut them down or hot weather shuts them down. And that's one of the benefits of doing what we do. I don't really get to take days off. If I have the opportunity to hunt, I got to go. And what you learn about that is you hunt all these conditions that aren't supposed to be any good, and we give them way too much credit for knocking down deer movement. I always look at it like, if it's warm during the rut, everybody says, the rutting action just doesn't happen. It's just not going on. And, I know there's some suppressed movement, but those fawns are born the same time every year, next spring. And I'm always sitting here going, I don't believe all of that chasing and breeding activity happened at night. Maybe you just missed it. Maybe it was in a lower bottom that was a little cooler or something, but I really think we love excuses to not hunt, and we use them way, way, way too much.
I think there's definitely some truth to that. I think and this is my personal philosophy for whatever that's worth. I think, when you have a piece of private land maybe where you can control what's happening on it, and you can be a lot more selective about, how hunting pressure is applied to that deer herd. I think in those types of cases, it makes a lot of sense, in my opinion, to be careful about when you hunt, because if you're not hunting, they're not getting pressured. And so you can kind of dictate.
Yep.
But on a public land hunting situation where you have no control, I think then, you need to take advantage of the opposite of what most people would say, because to your point,
Yep.
It's kind of a totally different situation. So I think that makes a lot of sense. So let's say the hunting season just started, or you've arrived at your trip now. Can you kind of walk us through what your process looks like? You mentioned that you typically like to start with an observation stand, but are you, I'm wondering about the actual nuts and bolts. Are you, the night you get there, are you sitting down and looking at your maps really hard, or do you already know exactly where you want to go in on the first day, or what are you doing that first night, and then from there?
Most of my map work is done long before I get there. It just depends. If I go like Oklahoma, for example, last year, we hunted the Black Kettle National Grassland, and it's, I think, 31,000 acres, but it's all busted up into different little chunks. And so my plan going into that changed a lot because of the hunting pressure. So if there was one truck parked at a place that I wanted to go into, I kind of wrote it off. So I was kind of going on the fly there, looking for new places that didn't have people in. So sometimes when I get there, I'll be poring over my maps because there's people there. But if I've done my homework and found a place where there just aren't very many hunters, I don't need maps a whole lot after I've been there. I should have done enough research ahead of time to kind of have an idea where to go. And for me, all that the reason you do that is so you can hit the ground running. I use a lot of really lightweight portable stands and sticks, and have a pretty good system for just getting out and going and hanging a stand right away and getting set up and hunting from the minute you get there. Because like I said, a lot of my hunts are 4 or 5 days, and you're traveling to a new state to try to kill a public land deer. I don't really have the luxury of, wasting any time. And if I'm doing an observation stand, I'm still hunting. So you might see a deer you could call in or something, but I like to get there and go. That's why to me, at least, the pre-hunt research is just so important.
Yeah. Can you tell us about your run and gun setup, your stand, sticks, and everything? What specifically are you using, and do you have any tips or things that you always do now that you're so experienced with it that kind of help you get up in the tree quietly and ready to go?
Yeah. So I use several different kinds of stands and sticks, but generally speaking, what I do is I have a real lightweight hunter safety system harness. It's 2 pounds. I carry a lifeline with me. I carry a Hoyman extendable saw, and I carry a stand that I like. I like stands that are in like the 8 to 12 pound range, just simple hang-ons, nothing fancy, no big platforms or anything, and then just a good set of sticks that I can marry together with bungee cords, so I can kind of carry my entire setup, depending on what else I bring with me. I'm looking at maybe like 22 to 25, 26 pounds total, maybe a little more if it's later and I'm carrying extra clothes or whatever. But I always pick stuff that I'm really comfortable with, so I can get in there and hang a stand as quietly as possible. In some places, you can use screw-in steps, not very often on public land, and that's another thing I should bring up. You always got to know the regulations, because a lot of places you can't even use a screw-in bow holder. So you got to be a little careful about where you're hunting and what the specific regulations are. But so because of that, for me, most of the time it's climbing sticks and a stand. But just have your system. For me, when I go out, I know exactly where my release is going to be, my tow rope, where everything is. And so you don't run into those little things where you forgot this or you forgot that. When you get to your tree, you can get up it and get in as quietly as possible. And it's not the most comfortable setup. It's not like you're carrying a big ladder stand in there that you can stretch out your legs and relax and take a snooze or something. But it's a really good portable stand that you won't struggle to set up. That's really important to me.
You mentioned you bringing a pulse out with you. What's your kind of thought process on trimming lanes in these types of hunts and these types of situations? Are you a minimalist, or do you clear as much as you can, or what do you think about that, given the fact you're trimming lanes during your hunt?
Well, that depends too on where you're at. Some places you can't, unless it's dead. But I'm a minimalist, especially when I'm walking in and hunting. On some of my private places, I'll cut good shooting lanes because I can do it right now and it doesn't affect anything later. But the more stuff you touch, the more stuff you knock down, the greater your chance of getting busted. So I try to keep it, really, really simple and cut as little as possible. But the one thing I've noticed, depending on which state you go to, where I live and where I hunt in Wisconsin and Minnesota, those deer look up a lot. We've been hunting them out of trees a long time. But some of these states I go to that have just a lot less pressure, I don't have to be nearly as careful about, trying to hide my silhouette in the trees or, just getting busted as much, because those deer just aren't as used to looking up. So there's sort of a benefit to that too. When you go to some of those flyover states, the deer are easier to hunt.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that compared to my home here in Michigan. When I've gone and hunted some spots in Iowa, they react very, very differently to human pressure, presence, and you can get away with a lot more. Now, question about your stand setups. So you mentioned you're using this portable setup. You're going in there, hanging and hunting. Are you usually working with just one stand and you go in, hang it, hunt it, pull it down? If you're going to move the next day, hang it, hunt it? Or do you come with 4 or 5 stands or something, and over the course of your 4 or 5 days, you're hanging different sets, leaving them, or showing up in the morning and hanging something for the next day, or things like that?
I always bring, usually probably at least 4. Some states you can leave them up overnight. Some states you can't. And so the states you can, it's a pain in the butt, but you just have to live by it. So a lot of times I'll pull a stand, stash it right at the base of the tree, and put it back up the next morning. Some states you can leave them up, and so that the one thing about this is, especially if you go to a state where you can leave them up, if you go in the first day you get there and kind of speed scout a few of those areas and just get some of your options set up, some of your stands set up, you'll hunt so much better because you can play the wind better and everything. And one of the things I've seen, even with some of my buddies that I travel with, is they're kind of cagey about going in and hanging stands or getting set up, or they're, second guess themselves a lot. And when you do that, you have fewer options. And when you have fewer options, you just don't hunt as well. So it's just easier to have easy to set up stands, go in, hang, maybe 3 of them in good spots, and then have that one floater you can carry with you if something cool comes up and you need to sit somewhere else, and just give yourself some options. Because, we take it for granted when you hunt, let's say your home farm, you might have 20 stands up. So no matter what the wind is doing, you got a place to sit. Now you go something like this, you might have 2 or 3 stands in a river bottom, and the wind stinks for every one of them. And then you either got to hang a new one or go build a natural blind or just not hunt. And so you just got to try to give yourself as many options as possible that way.
Yeah. What are you thinking about this, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, it's good information. I've only been out of state one time, and it was, as far as hunting deer is concerned, hunting whitetails, and there was no trees. I mean, it was in the least populated county in the United States, in Nebraska, and it was in the southern part of the Sandhills. So the way, I mean, I didn't know what I was really doing, but so I got to the highest point and I sat down and pulled out the binoculars, and that's where I would spend a lot of my time. And if I didn't see anything, off to the next little dune, the highest point, half a mile away, and then start all over again. So
I guess, like you mentioned, Dan, you're sitting somewhere, seeing what you can see, and then adjusting to that. To that kind of point, Tony, when you get in there, okay, you've gone in that first day, maybe you've set a handful of different stands up. How do you think about, giving a spot time versus reacting to what you see and moving? So if that first night you hunt and you see a good buck, are you moving immediately to right where you saw him? You are?
Yep. Oh yeah. And unless I have faith that, somebody's coming by the stand I'm in, I'm moving. I mean, I think deer are pretty predictable. They like doing the same things over and over again. And the one thing is, even if I don't see a big buck doing something, if I'm sitting there where I think it's going to happen, and I watch all the does walk through a different spot or the little bucks or something, I'll move right on top of them. And it's especially true if I see a good one do something. I don't like to wait around. I'm not a passive bow hunter. I like to get in on them and capitalize on what I see right now.
How important is that aggression? I mean, you have to know when to make that move, and you have to know when to say, okay, maybe I got to wait for this wind to shift. Are you connected digitally to weather patterns and stuff through your phone when you go out here to know when all that's happening and when to make your move? Yeah,
and like Dan said about the county in Nebraska with no trees. I mean, if you run into something like that, you can still make moves and do things. You're not just locked into doing tree stands. So if I see deer do something, if I'm sitting on a tree stand and I watch a big buck go through a patch of sumac or something that's 100 yards out in the middle of the open, there might be a way to get in on him, and it might not be move a tree stand. It might be go build a little natural ground blind. Might be carry a feeding doe decoy in there or something and hide behind it. There's options out there, but I really think a lot of bow hunters we're kind of conditioned to be passive, and the industry really, really thrives off of that by selling scents and lures and calls and all kinds of stuff that promise to bring deer to you, not go to deer. And so for me, I'd rather just figure out where deer like to walk, move right there and kill them. I don't rely a lot on calls and scents and lures and things like that. I like to figure out where deer like to go, and I like to get in there. And I think it's easier for people to sit there and say, well, I saw that buck walk 200 yards away and tried to rattle him in. Well, if he does that 3 times, you might want to get over there, or even if he does it once. If a big buck walks through somewhere, especially if it's just, if he's not pressured, he's just doing his thing, king of the forest, walking through, that deer will probably do it again, or somebody else that's a good deer will do it. Get on it. I don't like being passive that way and worrying about bumping them or something like that. I just like to get in there and try to get them.
Yeah, you make a good point too. If you see a mature buck traveling through a certain area, there's a reason why he's doing that, why he feels comfortable there, and whether or not that same deer does it again, there's likely other bucks that know that's a safe place to travel, or know that there's a reason to move through there. So it does make a lot of sense to get in there. Now here's my next question though. When do you like to make that move? And I mean specifically, are you moving after dark at night? So let's say you hunt in the evening and you move your stand after dark then? Or do you like to come in super early the next morning and hang your stand before daylight? Or do you like to wait until the middle of the day to move your stands? When do you do that restand shifting?
When I can. So a lot of times, the easiest to do it is if you're out there in the morning and you see something. Because then after everything settles down, you can slip over there, have good daylight, and just get it done. But a lot of times at night, I'll see something, and I'll glass and mark a tree or a spot. And when it gets dark, I'll slip over there and rehang my stand or build that natural blind or something. Or sometimes you just got to wait. You don't want to fumble around. And so just come in the next day when it's daylight and get it done. It just depends on the circumstances.
It makes sense. I've tried all three, and to your point, it can be frustrating to be stumbling around in the dark trying to hang a stand, and there's definitely benefits to it. If you can get it done then, but at the same time, sometimes you do that, and then you get in there the next day during daylight, and you see there's 7 lanes that you thought were to be clear, and instead they're all covered up with branches or something like that. So, Now, let's say I'm continuing down through this hypothetical hunt. You're hunting, you've hung some stands, you get up there, you've seen a buck maybe, you've made a move. What happens when other hunters screw up your hunt in some way? You're out there hunting, you think you're on it, and then all of a sudden another guy comes in. How do you react to that?
Restart, go somewhere else. It happens all the time. I don't ever go on a hunt like this without having somebody come in on me at some point, it seems like. Or, just stupid stuff. Like, just as an example, last year in Oklahoma, I had a spot that was about as far away as you could go on any of these public land chunks, and there was a really cool pond with a kind of a wooded draw leading to it, and it was a good spot. I went in there and hung a stand the first day I got there, and went to go back in there like 3 days later, and there was some idiot driving his Jeep around on this closed road, just tearing it up, mudding it up.
Jeez.
And, I knew it was over because what are you going to do? And stuff like that happens. People will move in on you. It just is what it is. And so that's another reason why you want to have your options. And I'm always thinking about that. So if I've got my heart set on, this river crossing stand, I may go there and there might be 2 trucks parked there and fresh tracks leading right in there. And so then if you don't get too frustrated and you've got a backup, you can get there and not lose your hunting time. But it's a constant struggle when you're on public land, especially if you get around the rut or opening week where just more people are out. You're just going to run into that. And it's part of the process. But like you said, I run into that on private land all the time on some of my farms. So it's just hunting. It seems like there's a lot of bow hunters out there now.
Yeah, so true. What happens in that case? If a hunter comes in, let's say, like you said, and we've had it happen many times, myself and Dan too. If that happens, do you immediately say, okay, I need to scrap this spot entirely, or are you willing to give it one more day and see maybe this is a one-time thing? They came through, they walked through the area once, and maybe the next day though, maybe they won't be there and a big buck comes through. Do you give it a little time, or do you say, all right, there's been one human invasion, I'm out, I'm moving on to the next place?
It depends. It depends how it happens. Just as an example, last year when I went out to South Dakota, I found a spot that was this walk-in area, had a cut cornfield, it had just a phenomenal cedar choke draw that looked like a great bedding area. And so I went in there hoping for a gimme, the field edge buck. And I was sitting there And, hour and a half before dark, 2 bow hunters came walking through carrying a full body decoy, just banging it on everything. And I had backup spots that I couldn't get to in time, but I had one area that I hung a stand, but I didn't convince myself to go sit yet. And when they came walking through, I said, okay, I got 2 days left. I'm going to go sit that pond stand that I've been avoiding, because I knew it was probably not going to be, I was probably not going to see a lot of deer down there, but it was probably the right setup to just ride it out, because I didn't think anybody would go in there. So when those guys came through on me, I said, okay, 2 days left. I'm going, sunrise to sunset on that pond stand, just because I thought it's good enough and people won't be there. I went in there and sat and killed a buck. It just, we talk about a lot of different things with bow hunting, but every one of us has that buddy that's like gets really down really quick. He's not a Zen master at all.
Yep.
And if your attitude starts to tank with running into people, you're going to hunt like you've never done it in your life, and it's going to get worse. And so you just got to learn to accept that and move on quickly, because people are going to screw up your hunts. And, somewhere along the line, you're going to bumble into some dude's setup too. You're going to be that guy. So it just happens.
Yeah, I got to believe that's probably, like you said, that's got to be one of the very most important things when you're hunting in this type of situation, is just going into it with the right attitude and knowing that you're going to have to adjust and make the best of it. Because like you said, if your mindset is gone, if you lose confidence and lose your focus, your odds of success are really dramatically plummeting just based on that. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Oh, big time. And, everybody's been in deer camp with somebody whose attitude stinks, and A, they're no fun to be around, and B, they don't kill anything because they're just not hunting like they should. And I've got a couple buddies I travel with a lot, and one of them really struggles with that. And I didn't tell him this, but I wrote an article for North American Whitetail about him versus some of my other buddies and their attitudes. And I didn't think he'd see it, but he did. But I wrote about how his attitude sucks, and he doesn't kill anything because he gets bummed so quickly. If he goes out on day one and misses a deer or bumps a deer, he's done for the entire trip. And I wrote about that. And I've got other buddies who just stay positive and believe they're going to kill stuff, and they kill a lot more stuff. And after he read that, I was like, well, dude, it's true. I mean, you got to stay more positive. And that year we went out to 2 different states, and he killed his first 2 out-of-state critters after trying for like 6 years. And I mean, part of it's just because the hunts worked out that way, but part of it was because he decided to just stay more positive. And I know it sounds like kind of hippie BS to be talking about, positive vibes and all this stuff. But man, if you don't, keep a good head about you over this stuff, you're going to not do very well out there in the deer woods.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more. And I think that applies even to private land hunters too. I mean,
Absolutely.
Regardless, I think attitude and your mindset and all of that, it makes such a huge, huge difference no matter where you hunt. If your mind's in the game, you've got a much, much better chance, because that's what this really is. It's a mind game. It's a game of chess, and if you aren't 100% there emotionally, mentally, and physically, you're not going to be able to outwit a mature buck, especially on public land. So.
Oh, absolutely. And, you won't have as much fun either. And this is supposed to be fun. And when you go out there and you're enjoying it, you do a better job of hunting. You just do.
Yeah.
I have one last question for you, and that is, how often do you play the position of another hunter into your strategy as far as where you're going to be hunting?
As far as if I know somebody's going to be hunting somewhere and I hunt somewhere else because of that?
Well, let's say you there's a buck and you see him and you're like, okay, I want to kill this deer. I know where he's coming in, but I also know where another hunter is going to be at. Are you ever trying to flank another hunter's position to try to gain access to a same area or hunt a same deer based off another hunter's position?
No, I really try to stay away from people. I don't like hunting around other hunters. The only time that I've really done something like that was, this is kind of a long story, but a couple years ago in North Dakota, out on public land there, I killed a 150-inch velvet 10-pointer in the first day of the season. Beautiful buck. I had him in camp and had a guy walk into camp and look at that buck, see it, and he ended up riding his four-wheeler down the river and saw my stand. I left it up for my buddies. And the next year I drove out there and went to go that river bottom, and there was a brand new stand in my tree that I had set up in the year before, and I've never seen anybody in there in like 5 years of hunting. Fresh branches trimmed underneath. And I thought, man, that's got to be that guy. But I didn't know for sure because there wasn't anybody else in camp at that time. And so I just had to find a way to get to the deer before they got there. And I ended up finding some whitetails kind of living in muley country and got ahead of them long before they crossed the river. They went through this patch of cottonwoods. I ended up killing a velvet buck opening day that year. And as I was taking pictures the following morning of that buck after getting him out, I saw that guy drive in and go down and set up his camp. And so in a way, I kind of did get ahead of him and cut those deer off before they got to him. But I kind of feel like he deserved it because he came in and took my stand tree. You know what I mean? And so, but no, most of the time, I just, if somebody's in an area, I try to stay out. And, you know, sometimes you can. I mean, I've got a spot in Nebraska that's so good, but it's not very big. And during the rut, it is just overrun with people. So you just accept the fact that you're probably going to be around other people, but it doesn't really matter. It's really, really good. But I don't ever intentionally go in and try to be close to somebody. I would rather, I give up on a lot of spots to stay away from people.
Do you have a distance? Do you have like a usual kind of, what's the word? I don't know. How far away do you need to be from another person for you to feel like you are, quote unquote, away enough to possibly see the type of deer? Is it 400 yards? Is it 100 yards? Is it half a mile? What's that kind of zone of clearance you need?
It depends where you're at, but my buddies and I have a 1 mile rule. So like when we grouse hunt, we have a 100-yard rule where we get at least 100 yards off the four-wheeler trails so we can find grouse that aren't blasted from every hunter on an ATV. When I deer hunt, I like to get a mile away from the access. So if I can go 1 mile in, I can leave a lot of the competition behind. And it only gets better if you have to cross a river or climb a hill to get that mile away. If you can do that, then you can leave a lot of people behind. I don't have a specific rule for how far away I want to be from somebody else that might be in a stand. You know, far is a good answer because a lot of times I've sat there and I've listened to guys rattle their heads off or something, and I'm just like, just shut up. But that's just part of the process, you know. So I'd rather just be away from the crowds in any way possible. And my entire strategy involves just that, just either hunting when they're not there or hunting far enough away where they're not going to go most of the time.
Yeah, makes sense. Now here's something we kind of haven't talked about this at all. I'm curious if it's part of your strategy on these public land hunts. It's such a huge part for so many other people's hunting strategies on private land and other places, and that's trail cameras. Do trail cameras factor into your hunts at all during these public land hunts?
No. So I have a love-hate relationship with trail cameras. I love them. They're so addictive. It's stupid. But I hunt Wisconsin a lot. I hunt private land in Wisconsin. And just as an example, I'm really working on a couple public land spots over there. I'm telling everybody that'll listen I'm going to kill a big buck in public land in Wisconsin, so I force myself to try to do it. But 2 years ago, I've been on a really good tear the last couple of years for filling tags, but northern Wisconsin has kicked my butt. And 2 years ago, I was running cameras over there because it's 2 hours. Where I hunt is about 2 hours and 20 minutes from my house. And so I can't just skip over there quick and scout. You know, when I go over there, it's a dedicated weekend. So I'm like, okay, I'll just rely on my trail cameras. And I hunted during the rut, and I just had the worst time because I would check like 5 or 6 trail cameras every day, and I felt like I was chasing ghosts, where I'd get a picture and I'd go sit there and it was just over. And I didn't feel like I was hunting the way I should. I felt like I should have been walking in looking for sign and hanging stands. And what I was doing was waiting for a camera to give me the green light to kill one there. And it wasn't happening. And so I've really backed off the trail cameras on these public land hunts to the point where I don't bring one on most of them, because then I rely on something that just, it changes how I hunt in a way that I don't like. Now, when I'm at home, I love running trail cameras. I set a camera up yesterday on a little food plot here in Minnesota, just hoping to catch some pictures of some turkeys and random deer or whatever. I'm not against them, but when I'm trying to figure out right now what the deer are doing, it's almost like trail cameras set me back a little bit. And I think, this probably sounds really weird, but I kind of feel like we're using them way too much to supplement actual scouting. And not to mean that they're not, because they can be so valuable in the right situation, but they aren't the answer to all of our problems, and we rely on them a lot.
Yeah. To that point, you mentioned real scouting. We talked a little bit about scouting in the beginning, but we didn't really get into the actual things on the ground you're looking for. Do you pay any attention? No, I'm talking in season, I guess. Well, either one, I guess preseason or in season. Do you pay attention? Are you just looking for where's the traffic, from a trail standpoint or river crossing standpoint or something like that? Or do you pay attention to rutting sign like rubs, scrapes, etc.?
Big tracks, beaten trails, I love them. You can't fake a track. If it's a big track, it's a big deer. Scrapes, I can remember when I turned 12, 1992, I started bow hunting, and scrapes were such a big deal then. That's all my dad and his buddies talked about. And so I've sat over so many scrapes in my life and so very rarely killed a buck on them. In fact, I've probably only killed maybe like 2 bucks because of scrapes. And so I totally kind of backed away from that. And I really, really like rubs. I like rubs that show me where a staging area is. That's probably my favorite thing, where there's kind of a cluster of rubs here and a cluster of rubs there, and it's not just a straight rub line. I look for that a lot, especially as you get into October. But there is a time period, kind of seems, at least around here, it seems to be like October 10th through October 20th kind of, where I'm starting to like scrapes more. I killed a buck on public land here in the cities a few years ago by just observing, and I watched this buck that I hadn't seen since July. He came out in the middle of October, made a scrape. Another little 8-pointer came out next to him, made a scrape, and they sparred. And then the next night I moved in over that scrape thinking, what do I got to lose? It's middle October. It was hot and windy. And that buck came out, and I killed him on that scrape. And so I started paying more attention to scrapes during that time period, and had some other kind of random positive encounters around them during that time. But they're still kind of a minor part of my strategy. But I really like, so there's another long-winded answer for you. Tracks, trails, and good rubs I like a lot.
I love it. Love those long answers. When you mentioned the staging areas that you identify by way of rubs, can you elaborate a little bit on what that looks like and what type of area you might find that?
So, yeah, absolutely. I think I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but I really think staging areas are probably the most valuable kind of, if you understand the staging areas and how to find them, if you hunt pressured land, they're so important. Because we all know, you get out there on opening weekend and everybody's sitting their field edges hoping for that gimme, and they want to see a long ways. But those bucks and the does and every deer out there figures out pretty quickly that 85% of the hunting pressure is concentrated on those field edges. And so instead of going totally nocturnal like we like to think they do, a lot of them just start moving later, and they start finding these places in the cover where they can mill around, they can make a rub, they can maybe eat some acorns, grab, browse a little bit, and not leave the cover. And so for me, if I don't kill a deer, opening weekend or opening week, I start immediately backing off and getting into the cover. And you can walk into these places, and it might be 100 yards off the food source, it might be 200 yards, but you'll suddenly start to see just random rubs. And you'll see a big pile of buck poop here, maybe a little scrape here, and you can just look around, and it just looks like a place where a buck killed time. And if it's in the cover, he probably did it in daylight, and you might be able to kill him there right then. I really like those types of areas for the timing of the season when most people are kind of shutting down and going, okay, now I'm going to wait for Halloween. You start getting into the lull a little bit, those staging areas can be unbelievable.
Yeah, it's a great point.
That lull word's a bad word.
It's a bad word.
So do you believe in the lull?
No, not to the extent most people do. I think the lull exists to some extent. Maybe there is some suppressed movement, but having grown up in Minnesota, I had to hunt October every year. I didn't have a choice, and I've killed an awful lot of bucks in the beginning and the middle of October. And I think we give it too much credit. Now, if I lived in a state like Iowa where I could hunt the rut all in November, yeah, I'd probably be like, oh, the lull stinks, I'm not hunting it. But here, I don't have a choice. And so, is it your best time to kill a buck? No. But is it as bad as we make it out to be? I don't think so.
Yeah.
What about mornings?
I love mornings. So, are you asking me maybe like early season mornings?
Yeah, early season mornings, let's say, because in some of your previous comments, you mentioned, hey, I'm going to go out and hunt these states the very first week possible. And depending on who you ask, those are the deer don't even move till dark. So why hunt, and then you don't want to hunt mornings because by the time you get in there, they're already on their way or back to their bed before sunrise. So, I'm a huge fan of hunting mornings myself. Mark, on the other hand, is not a huge fan of hunting mornings early season. I just was curious about what your approach is.
I hunt every morning I can. This is another thing. So there's that always and never rule. So when you say that you always do this or never do this, you're going to be wrong. And I hear that constantly. People say, don't hunt mornings in the early season. Well, there's an infinite number of setups out there and situations for bow hunters that just beg to differ. I mean, in general, maybe it's not as good as evenings. We all know that. But nobody will sit there and tell me that every buck on this farm is going to be in bed before first light and not moving through this wooded draw or something at first light. I don't believe that. And I go out and hunt enough where it just doesn't hold water. Now, again, if you're really managing pressure and you want to make the most of every sit, yeah, you want to be careful around that. But I hunt mornings. We'll start in North Dakota on August 31st or whenever it is, and I'll hunt mornings right on through till the end of the season. And I don't kill as many bucks in mornings as I do in evenings, but I have a lot of encounters and I kill enough bucks I just don't buy into that you can't find a situation where you can't get in there and hunt. Now, granted, it may be, on certain properties, there isn't the possibility to get in and hunt good spots in the morning. I mean, that exists too, where you'll get busted. I've got places like that where you just can't risk it. But if you have enough places to hunt, or you go out and find a big enough place to hunt, you can find a place to slip into in the morning and try to kill a big one. I think that's one of the most fun things about bow hunting. If somebody sits there and says you can't do this, I want to try really hard to prove that you can. And so I like mornings a lot.
I think you make a good point about, it's situational, right? Everything's situational.
Right.
There's never going to be a hard set rule when it comes to deer. And in like a situation like you mentioned, where if you have a large enough property where you can find that certain right spot and there's less risk because that there might be a chance I might spook something even though I go in here, but I've got lots of other options. Or if you've got multiple different properties. But I think on the other hand, at least in my opinion, in a situation where if you're hunting one small property in a heavily pressured place, that might not be your best time to go in there and risk spooking deer and ruining your other hunts that might have higher odds. So I think it's something that all these things, I think a big takeaway for me, or a good reminder, is that everything's situational. Don't take something that so-and-so said as a given rule for everything in your exact situation and their exact situation, but think about how these different things can apply to your circumstances. Figure out what fits given your situation, where you hunt, and all the other factors surrounding it.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and a point on that too is to effectively hunt in the morning, especially in the early season, you're going to have to work a lot harder than you do at night. So for me, when I think about just the random places I hunt, I almost always have to walk farther and be more careful by far in the mornings to get into spots than I do in the evenings. So it's just more work to hunt them the way you should, but it doesn't mean that you can't do it successfully. It just takes a lot more effort.
Yeah. So I want to kind of rewind back to something you talked about like 45 minutes ago or something like that. You had talked about how you typically like to go to the deer. You don't like to try to bring deer to you. So you mentioned you don't particularly care for calls and scents and decoys and stuff like that, at least on public land. Is there ever a time for those types of things in a public
Sure.
land situation? And if so, what do you like a little more than others?
So, yeah, I should clarify that. I mean, I call in deer. I do some of that stuff, but my strategy is to always get where the deer want to be. So I look at it this way. Let's say you go out and you rattle blindly a bunch of times and you're hoping to just call one in from somewhere, you're maybe hoping to reach out 300 yards to that buck. And in a place with some pressure, most of those deer aren't going to do that. They're not coming in. And so for me to really be effective with calling, especially, and to a lesser extent, scents and lures or whatever, it's, if I'm 80 yards away from that buck and he's already where he feels comfortable, giving him a snort wheeze or grunting at him or something, he's a lot more comfortable covering, 40, 50 yards to get to me, as opposed to sprinting across a 500-acre cornfield or something. And so if you're already where that deer feels comfortable, because that's the one thing about those big bucks, when you watch them move through the woods, they don't walk around like they're all neurotic and cautious. They walk around like they're kings of the woods and they can kick everybody's butt. And so they're confident where they're at. And if you get in there and he's in his zone, his place, and he hears that contact grunt and it's not very far away, getting him to come over is a lot easier. But you have to do the work ahead of time instead of just going out hoping that call will do the work for you. I always look at it like, let's say you're turkey hunting and it's 11 o'clock in the morning and you see that gobbler out strutting in that cut cornfield, and he'll gobble his head off at you, but he's 300 yards away and he's just not going to cross that distance. Well, if you can sneak around and crawl up into a wooded point or something and get to 50 yards from him when he's doing his little loop, strutting back and forth, if you offer him up some yelps when he's at that 50, 60-yard mark, it's a lot easier for him to just sneak over and check you out there than opposed to calling him all the way across that field. And deer are the same way. If you're already in there where they like to be, all those other kind of get rich quick products out there, those work a heck of a lot better.
Yeah, so true. I think that's a big part of my, mindset when it comes to calls and anything like that. Is it's much better to have a smaller room for error by just being right in their wheelhouse, and you only need them to get them to come maybe 10, 15, 20 yards further versus trying to make something perform a miracle for you, because most of the time it's not going to do that.
Yeah.
So we're getting pretty close here on time. Dan, do you have any final question for Tony?
No, I think I asked all the ones I needed to ask.
All right. Well then,
great information.
Yeah, definitely. So I've got one more for you, Tony. That's a little bit, it's related but different. So given how much time you spend on public land and your focus on that, I'm curious, have you been paying attention to or hearing at all about the recent push to transfer public lands to states or sell in general? If so, what are your thoughts on that? Is that concerning you?
Yeah, it's hugely concerning. And if any hunter out there is sitting there saying this isn't a big deal, they're not paying attention. Because if that land, the big push to transfer the land from federal ownership to state, if that keeps going, because it's already happened. This is the reason it's so scary is we've seen it happen, and the results never favor the hunters. They never favor us. They favor wealthy people who can buy that land when it comes up for sale, which it inevitably will. If this trend continues, these opportunities that we take for granted to be able to go to Colorado for elk hunting or Montana or wherever, and it will creep to the Midwest as well. If this trend continues, it is going to affect us so much more than we believe right now. It's tremendously dangerous to do that.
Yeah, I think Dan and I are definitely in agreement on that, and I've even been recently hearing a lot more about this is already happening in Wisconsin. There's been a ton of their land out there, their public land being sold off, and I think there's a lot of states, even like you mentioned, in the Midwest or in the east part of the country where there's some of these national forests still that if this happens, they could definitely be impacted too. So yeah, I think to your point, this is something that even us whitetail hunters need to be concerned about, paying attention
Absolutely.
to, and making sure that we are fighting for our public access in these different properties, because once you lose them, they're not coming back.
Well, and that's exactly it. And, we should clarify there's a difference. When we say selling off public land, some states have a no net loss law. So if they sell off something, they have to buy something. So there may be public land sales that are okay in that situation, but what we're talking about here is the wholesale transfer of federal lands to state ownership. And when that happens, the state becomes responsible for generating revenue off of them, and oftentimes they can't. And so then they have to sell it. And what's worse is if you look at some of the examples out there in Oregon, for example, there's situations where the Endangered Species Act is coming into play. So now maybe we turn over this national forest to the state, and they say, okay, we can mine some minerals off here. We can do some, pull some oil out of the ground or whatever, and pay for this land and justify it. Well, then along comes the Endangered Species Act, and there's some kind of warbler out there or something that's endangered, and now you can't do that. Or timber harvest, you can't selectively timber harvest, and that handcuffs these states, and the only option they have left is to sell it. And when they sell it, it goes from public to private, and you lose, and you'll never get it back. And so it's a dangerous thing out there right now.
Yeah, it really is. And, for all of our listeners, if you've heard some of our previous episodes on this, I know you're well versed. But if not, make sure to check out our past episode with Randy Newberg, all about this topic. I can't remember which number that was. It was 90 or 87 or something like that. But if this is something that you're hearing about for the first time, definitely spend a couple minutes, try to learn a little bit more, because it really is an important topic, even for whitetail hunters, for us guys here in the Midwest or out west, East Coast, South, wherever it is. I think we need to make sure we stand up for our public lands. So,
absolutely, everybody could learn something from Randy Newberg. Everybody.
That's the truth. Great guy. So, Tony, I guess final question for you is: anything that we should be looking forward to in upcoming issues of Bowhunter magazine from you, or anywhere we should be looking out for some interesting stories in the future?
Oh yeah, I got a whole bunch of stuff coming up in Bowhunter. Starting in the July issue, I'll be writing about these public land hunts that I did last fall. But I'm always writing something in there. I got a pretty good schedule lined up this fall to go hunt a bunch of public land stuff. So I'll keep cranking out the content in there. So if anybody wants to read it, it'll be in Bowhunter.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to make sure to take a look at that. I've enjoyed reading your stuff in the past, and now getting to chat with you more, I'm even more excited to follow those adventures. So I'm definitely going to do that, Tony. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think everyone learned something, whether they hunt private or public. And for those out there who are going to be doing some public land hunting, I think you just opened up a huge wealth of knowledge to help them in the future. So thank you for that.
Well, awesome. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Absolutely. Good luck this season, Tony.
Thank you. You too.
All right. Bye-bye. All right. Awesome stuff. I personally really enjoyed that episode, and like I kind of alluded to at the beginning, since I'm probably going to be doing some more public land hunting, this was maybe of particular interest to me. But man, Tony had some great stuff to share that I really do think you can apply even on private land and have more success. So again, big thank you to Tony for joining us. Stoked. Really enjoyed that. So I guess before I continue raving about how much I enjoyed that conversation, I do want to share a couple quick updates before we let you go. First and foremost, want to let you know that we have launched a new vlog, a video blog series on Wired to Hunt, on the Wired to Hunt YouTube channel, in which I'm going to be posting weekly short videos, bringing you along, in some cases, the day in the life, what I'm doing in the whitetail woods, or maybe during the season, what's actually happening on a specific hunt. We're going to be talking about different strategies, tips, sometimes sharing stories, profiling different hunters I know, sometimes answering your questions, doing some Q&A sessions, a lot of cool different things we're going to be doing on that video series. So make sure to check that out over at wiredtohunt.com and our YouTube channel, which is at youtube.com/wiredtohunt. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can get those videos every week. Speaking of subscribing, if you haven't yet subscribed to the Wired to Hunt podcast, please do that. It would be a huge help for you. You get these episodes right on your phone or tablet or wherever you listen. It'd be sent right to you every week when we release a new episode. So definitely check that out. And while you're on iTunes, maybe doing that, if you haven't yet, could you leave us a rating or review? That is a huge help, and we really appreciate it. Now, speaking of showing our appreciation, we also need to thank our partners who have helped make this podcast possible. So big thanks to Sitka Gear, Trophy Ridge, Bear Archery, Redneck Blinds, Huntera Maps, Ozonics, Carbon Express, Lacrosse Boots, and the Whitetail Institute of North America. So with that said, finally, I also want to thank you. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us. I hope you enjoyed this as much as we did. And until next time, stay wired to hunt.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase.
Outdoor adventure won't wait for engine problems. Things like hard starts, rough performance, and lost fuel economy are often caused by fuel gum and varnish buildup. Seafoam can help your engine run better and last longer. You simply pour a can into your gas tank. Hunters and anglers rely on Seafoam to keep their engines running the way it should the entire season. So pick up a can of Seafoam today at your local auto parts store or visit seafoamworks.com to learn more.